A fire at a popular nightclub in India's Goa state kills at least 25. National Park's fee-free calendar drops MLK Day and Juneteenth and adds Trump's birthday. Ukrainian city hit by massive strike as peace talks with U.S. conclude. U.S. Supreme Court may be poised to ditch more of its precedents. A land fight pits a sacred Apache tradition against a copper mine. These were just a few of the top headlines that showed up in my news feed this morning. I don't know if they were in yours. Just 5 of the thousands of headlines of this morning speaking to humankind's devotion to military violence as its main problem solver, to white supremacy and corporate colonialism as reigning powers in this country, to new examples that the checks and balances system of government here that is supposed to guard against tyranny isn't checking or balancing very much at all anymore, and an accident that snuffed out at least 25 lives, each of which was a universe of love and possibility. Reading stories like this catches my breath in my chest, and it twists my stomach in knots, and it freezes tension in my muscles, and it can cause my brain to spiral or just want to shut down. I want to stop all of it. I want to find a true and lasting worldwide peace, and I want to strengthen and expand democracy and the power of the people to make decisions for all. I want to dismantle racism and do everything possible to restore and support Indigenous communities after all of the evil that has been done to them in the name of this country that is my home. I want people to be safe from harm. I want everyone to be able to make it home. After a night shift at their kitchen job or a night out dancing, I want to stop all of it. And I have almost no power to affect any of it. And I feel so profoundly devastated and furious and so wildly helpless so much of the time, almost always when I read the headlines like this, and almost every day has them. But it's not just the situation of the wider world that makes us feel like this, right? Closer to home, we'll watch a family member struggle with addiction, or we might receive a cancer diagnosis. Our partner loses their job, or we have a child whose heart is broken. A neighbor is evicted, or the costs of our health insurance are skyrocketing and we know we can't pay the new bill. The experience of powerlessness and helplessness and rudderlessness happens in our lives in these countless small and massive ways over the course of our existence. And so for many of us, or maybe all of us, one of the instincts is to scramble for control when this happens. Anybody else scramble for control when you feel helpless? To grasp it wherever we can find it. We become overbearing in our workplaces because we have chaos at home. Or we become too rigid in our personal routines when we feel ineffective in our school or our work life. And many of us will go to great lengths to delude ourselves into thinking that we do actually have control when circumstances are beyond our power, because that feeling of helplessness is just so hard to bear. But there comes a point for most people in the midst of great suffering when we have to surrender. Surrender to our own powerlessness. Surrender to the reality that we cannot change what is happening. Surrender to the nature of existence, as Octavia Butler and the Buddha remind us that the only lasting truth is change, that all is dukkha, all is impermanence. Many of you have heard me speak before about the ending of my first marriage. I was in my late 20s. I was in a job that was not a good fit for me, despite it being the job I had trained for and all that I could imagine doing with my life at the time. My beloved father had been diagnosed with terminal brain cancer and had passed away a couple of years earlier. And my marriage, which was filled with this overwhelming and enormous love, nevertheless seemed to be making both me and my spouse smaller. And there was a night when I awoke in the middle of the night in the dark with the statement, "I need to get a divorce," echoing through my head. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an issue to be explored. It was one of those moments of deep knowing that terrified me and devastated me in a time when fear and grief had already been my daily companions for several years. I didn't wake up my spouse at the time and tell him right then. I didn't know if I should trust that voice in my head. Not at first, anyway, and I so desperately wanted to be able to control it, to tell it, "No, I do not need to get a divorce. We love each other. We were meant for each other. We have a good life that we built together." But over the course of those next days and weeks and months and really years, despite all of my best efforts to hold on to that life that I had built at that time, most of it shattered around me. The marriage ended. I left the job. We sold our home, and I moved to the other side of the country with no idea what would happen next. I entered into a period of surrendering in my life, in unknowing, a period of unknowing about most areas of my life, when I had always been a 5-year strategic plan kind of girl. Surrender, that kind of big experience of surrender, is a cold and stark experience for me. It doesn't feel like a strong, chill wind. It feels more like that feeling when you open the door and take the first breath of frigid air when you go outside in the deep of winter. It's bracing. It wakes you up. It feels startlingly alone, at least at first. But that experience of surrender also has a freedom to it. When we have so much to occupy us, when we have these little plans and routines and obligations and duties and all of the meeting of everybody else's expectations, the meeting of society's expectations, life can feel full and it can feel meaningful. It's true, I'm not saying it's not. But often we have chosen many of those obligations, and often we have chosen many of those obligations and duties and routines. And even when we wouldn't have chosen for them to shatter, there can be something liberating about their absence. But what I didn't have at that time of surrender and shattering, that cold, stark, and also sort of liberating time for me, was a framework for meaning. I didn't know how to make meaning of it. I grew up in this faith tradition, and I had always held its theology and values as my own, even at times when I've stretched from here and I've explored and I've questioned. I knew that everyone had inherent dignity and worth. I still know that. I knew that I was interdependent with all life. And I believed that the purpose of my existence was to love and to help things get better. I still believe all those things. Like our chalice lighting each week, I was focused on using my power to heal and to help and to bless and to serve. That was what I knew was what it was right to do. But when I was confronted with my own deep powerlessness, what did my faith have for me then? Unitarian Universalists don't often talk about surrender. I do not mean to manipulate you, but I intentionally didn't call this service surrender because I thought lots of you wouldn't come. It was called surrender up until Friday morning. Our theology and our values mostly arise from the old social gospel movement in liberal theology, this movement in the late 1800s and early 1900s, when Protestants started believing that it was humankind's job to rid itself of social evils and to bring about social justice, rather than just waiting for God to do it during the Second Coming. This movement gave rise to policies and institutions that supported labor rights, public welfare. It helped end child labor and more. It's all over the New Deal. It's the idea that if we work hard together, we can build heaven on earth, that we can be God's hands in the world. And though there's lots of critique about this movement, and I am also on board with lots of the critique about the movement, it's a meaningful theological movement. And I've preached these ideas to you many, many ways over the last near decade together, even though we don't do it in a solely Christian way, the way we used to in the late 1800s and early 1900s. It's about believing in the good of humankind, about empowerment, about using what we have together to make the world a better place. It's like the summary of most sermons I've ever preached. But so much of it is out of our control. Most of it, really, most of life. Even the things that we think we have control over could mostly be swept away at any moment by water that pours in too quickly or rises too fast, or by a person who is unable to connect to their own empathy in the midst of their own rage and happens to have a gun. Those of us who have a home and a job and a family and some kind of wealth and some kind of health, and I don't know if there's any of us who have all of those things together in this room. Those of us who have those things, any of those things, can feel stable, but it's actually fragile, and it's ultimately temporary at best. And so in these times when politically, when worldwide events make us feel so helpless and so terrifyingly out of control and so devastatingly disconnected and so profoundly powerless, does our faith, which is so loud about how we can use our power for good, how we say those words every week together, does our faith in times of surrender, does our faith offer only silence to us? In the periods of our life when all else we thought we could rely upon feels absent, does our religion abandon us too? In those days and weeks and months, and what ended up really being years, when I was in that place, when my marriage was ending, when it felt like so much of my life was shattering, I felt alone in my search to find sacredness in surrender, to find meaning in that emptiness. I didn't have well-worn ideas from my UU faith to accompany me there. I didn't have a chalice lighting that I could come back to. Our hymns didn't speak to me then. But I did find God there. I had not been a person who had ever found God language particularly meaningful for me in my life before that point. But in that time, and it might have been a coincidence, or it might have been just because I really, really needed it, I was able to think of God as another word for music. And eventually that evolved into God as a synonym for everything, for all of it, the whole. And it was this kind of abstractness, this vastness of my definition of God that ended up being so meaningful for me in that time. God was not a being with a will who decides what happens and decided that I was going to be going through what I went through. But God was infinity itself. It was so huge that it could contain all of it, all the things that I had built and all of the ways that they shattered. The Father I loved who had died, the love that was still there so strongly for the spouse that I had left, the slap-in-the-face reality that I could not control my life and did not know what would come next, and the freedom and the fear in all of that possibility. Infinity could actually contain all of that. My father was no longer there, my husband was no longer there, my job and my hometown were no longer part of my daily life, but God could be. I know others in this community who use God language for the holy in their lives might have a more intimate understanding of God. God as a companion who journeys alongside us, no matter what. God who is the one who is there in times of powerlessness, in times of surrender when nobody else might be. I know people in 12-step communities who otherwise consider themselves atheists or agnostics for much of their lives often find other creative understandings of the idea of a higher power in times of those shatterings in life, those rock bottom times. For those who are not super familiar with the 12 steps, the first 3 steps in the 12-step framework are something like this. The first one is admitting powerlessness over one's addiction, not something UUs love doing, admitting powerlessness. 2, believing that a higher power of some kind can restore one's life. Hard for people who identify as atheists or agnostics. And 3, turning one's life over to the care of that higher power. Again, so much surrender. It's so hard for so many of us here. I know some people begin to find synonyms for God or higher power that work for them when they enter 12-step communities. Some people who can't find a synonym but feel desperate for recovery will sometimes start with just calling their recovery community their higher power, whoever is there in the meeting with them that day, trusting that the people around them who've been through something similar can help to hold their life. as they begin to dust themselves off down there at the bottom, at the rock bottom. But you know what? God's language, which is useful to me, has been useful to many people, it's not necessary at all for a faithful framework of meaning in times when we feel powerless, the times of surrender. I know many others here find mindfulness to be the wisdom that meets them in those moments, those places. If your heart's racing with anxiety, mindfulness can call us to bring our awareness to the present moment and ask us to be present to the racing heart and reminding us that the heart will restore its regular rhythm at some point. Racing thoughts, meditation can invite us to be aware of that race, aware of the thoughts, but also aware of the breath, aware of the feel of our body on the seat. There's a Buddhist story that's attributed to several folks. A lot of people attribute it to teacher Ajahn Chah. It goes like this. A monk had a beautiful, delicate teacup, and his student asked him about the cup, and much to the student's surprise, he replied, "Oh, this cup, it's already broken." "What do you mean?" asked the student, who saw that it was holding tea. And the monk said, "To me, this cup is already broken. I enjoy it. I drink from it. It holds my water admirably. Sometimes it even reflects the sun in beautiful patterns, and when I tap it, it has a lovely ring to it. But when I put it on the shelf, and the winds blow and gets knocked over, or when I put it on the table and I knock it over, or my cat does and it shatters on the ground, I say, of course. Because when I understand that the cup is already broken, then every moment I have with it is precious." Most of us are not like that monk. That monk is probably not always like that monk. When something important in our lives shatters, when we feel helpless against the wind or against the presidential administration, or simply against the slow march of time or against cancer, we mostly haven't been thinking of everything as already broken. Even when we have had deep encounters with our own helplessness in life, we've learned these lessons before, we often forget them. We usually return to some kind of clinging to a sense of control later on. What I know to be true of myself, and I know it to be true from the many stories that you guys have told me, is that when those moments of encountering our powerlessness, that when we allow ourselves to surrender, when we're in those powerless moments, and we find something sacred there, when we feel that bracing emptiness and liberation of the absence of all duties and obligations, the absence of a sense of purpose, when we find God, or we find moments of true attention, or we find the startling, ringing truth of impermanence in life, that we are transformed. Because finding something that is transcendent in absence, that rings with our souls, can sometimes allow the tension in our body to begin to melt. It can allow some of that terror to start to lift off of our shoulders. And sometimes those moments can go from being just a worst moment in our life to being maybe a worst moment, but also one of the most important moments of our lives. Losing all that we wanted and all that held us captive is not usually a joyful thing. Usually it's not fun, it doesn't feel good, it doesn't feel sweet. But it can widen us, and it can deepen the breath that enters our lungs. And it can allow us to stretch out into that space that is the right amount of space for us to take up in this one life we have. Using our power to heal with love and help with compassion and bless with joy and serve the spirit of freedom in the fullness of community still matters. There's a reason that much of our theology and much of our faith speak to how we can use what we have to make the world better. This is, in fact, the purpose of our living, as I understand it. And abdicating our duties to one another is not okay. And if we use the idea of surrender to really mean giving up when things get a little too hard, that's not okay. But when we cannot change the Supreme Court's decisions, and when we have no power over the National Parks Service's calendar, And when a devastating accident wipes out precious lives or a loved one is suffering in a way that is beyond our help, it does not mean that we are failures of using our power. It doesn't mean that our faith tradition abandons us. Surrendering when we must, and letting an infinite God hold everything for us for a little while, or reminding ourselves that the cup is already broken, that the only lasting truth is change, that can be what we need. Because sometimes we feel a sense of duty or obligation to doing those things that we've already done. Sometimes those duties and obligations don't actually come from what is right. They come from capitalism, or they come from patriarchy, or they come from white supremacy culture, or whatever else. Sometimes the patterns that we are in are not good patterns for us. And sometimes we mistake guilt for responsibility. Sometimes we overhelp others as a way of hiding and running from our own pain. Sometimes we center ourselves to avoid the terror that comes when we encounter our own helplessness. Sometimes it's good to encounter surrender, to let it all go. And so as I close today, my friends, if today you are feeling helpless against all that is horrific in our world, or powerless over something that is painful in your life, I want to offer these words of the poet Wendell Berry. It's called Our Real Work. It may be that when we no longer know what to do, we have come to our real work. And that when we no longer know which way to go, we have come to our real journey. The mind that is not baffled is not employed. The impeded stream is the one that sings. Amen. And blessed be. Hi, I'm Reverend Abby Tennis. I use she and her pronouns, and I have the honor of serving as the lead minister here at the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia, where our mission is to awaken love and justice in our lives and in the world. We're so glad that you watched this video, and we hope that the message connected with your soul. I also wanted to invite you to join us each week, either virtually for a live Zoom service at 11 a.m. Eastern, or in person here at 2125 Chestnut Street in Center City, Philadelphia. In these services, you'll hear messages like the one that you just heard, and you'll have a chance to greet one another and pray together, sing together, and even hold coffee hour after service, both virtually and in person, to get a chance to greet some new and old friends. You can always find a Zoom link to our services on our website, which is philauu.org. It's linked below, philauu.org. And if you want to support the mission of this congregation or feel moved to give, you can do so by going to that link and clicking on giving, or by texting us at 215-709-5095 and following the prompts. If someone in your life needs to hear this message, I hope you'll forward this video. Again, thank you so much for watching, and we hope to see you sometime soon. Bye.